Whenever we have a child that's struggling in school or struggling in life, what we have to do is find out what the trouble is. It's just like when a car doesn't work. If a car doesn't work, you have to take it to a mechanic, and the mechanic looks at the car to figure out how come it won't start. Is it out of gas? You know, is the motor burnt out? Is the starter finished? Is the generator dead? And the mechanic figures out what's wrong with the car, and then we fix it, and away we go. Now, children are infinitely more complicated than cars. Oh, you can't even imagine how complicated a child actually is, or an adolescent. And adults, oh, they get too complicated. Forget about adults, we can't figure them out. But children are terribly complicated. When you imagine that the brain of a human being, can you imagine the brain of a human being is so complicated? You know, some people think that the brain is a computer, it's just a computer. No, it's much, much more than that. The brain is made up of millions and millions of computers, and they're all tied up together in a very complicated network. And guess how many computers there are in your brain? It's, how many would you say? A million is a good guess. But actually it's way, way more than that. It's 10 to the 11th power. It's 10 times 10 times 10, 11 times. You know how many computers you have? It's as many as there are stars in the Milky Way. Isn't that amazing? I think it's because it was created by the same fellow, you know. When they were making the world, he was wondering, how many stars should we put in the Milky Way? And God said, oh, maybe 10 to the 11th power, that could be good. And then when he was building his masterpiece, a human being, they wondered, how many little computers should we put in the head? And again he said, oh, how about 10 to the 11th power? And so we have millions and billions of computers in our heads. So never ever let anyone tell you that you're stupid, because you're not. You have an amazing brain that does all sorts of things. There's so much wiring in the human body and in the human brain. We should have a guess at how much wiring there is to connect all the bits of skin to the brain, connect every muscle to the brain, every joint has to be connected to the brain. If you put it all together, the wiring end for end, it would go around the equator 4 times. There's over 100,000 miles of wiring in your body because the brain has to pick up all that data, huge amount of data. And so the brain is very complicated in a human being. We'll never ever be able to make a computer like the human brain. It's far, far beyond any possible computer that man can make. A human being has all the memory we generally need, except when we get older we could use a little more. But we have enough memory as a rule. But there's many, many other things that the brain has to do that computers simply cannot do. And so when we look to see what's happening with a child, why is the child struggling in school? Or why is the teenager, adult struggling? We just use this as a bit of an outline. It's a little bit like a computer. There's input, like when you put things into a computer, and then there's output. And everything has to go through the senses. Aristotle, imagine, discovered that 300 years before Christ. He discovered that nothing goes into the mind unless it comes through our 5 senses. And we just have 5 senses: vision, audition, touch, smell, taste. That's it. And everything has to go through there. And what we forget sometimes in our schools and in our doctor's offices, we forget this. And when a student is having trouble in school, we start giving them labels, like they might have ADHD, or they have a learning disability, they have all these things. The first thing we have to look at is how are the senses working? This is as if the mind is like the theater. You want to see the movie, And if you want to see the movie, you have to come through the front door. And if you don't come through those 5 doors, you don't see the show. And it's the same with a human being. So it's always important to check the senses. And then after that, the senses have to be organized.